he will open the conference, even before he said, yes, I will do so, because we know the man. At this juncture, because we know the man, I want to take the opportunity to ask him to come to the podium and do the necessaries.
Why are you worrying? I can reach you now. My voice carries very far. Mr. Chairman, Madam Deputy Mayor, Regional Chairman Seram, President of the TUC, with that very inspiring message for us. Of course, General Secretary, former members of Parliament, including Minister Henry Jeffrey, executive members of the affiliated unions, distinguished guests, and comrades all. It's a great pleasure for me to be here to respond to this very generous invitation extended to me by the Trades Union Congress in relation to its Triennial Delegates Congress. And I hope you'll bear with me if I start by being very personal or sharing some personal thoughts. I've had quite a long association with Guyana's labor movement, the unions in any case. And that interface hadn't always been easy. We had difficult times. But what I want to say is this, and it relates to distinguished gentleman called the Caribbean Fox, Joseph Polydor, an exceptional leader of the movement, served as General Secretary, I don't know for how many years, and he was an inspiration. We sat on different sides of the table. I see, well, I suppose most people here will know him by name, even if you weren't privileged to work with him. But he was at once a very tough character, very wily, but also very generous. And I remember, and I must tell you this, that we had, as I said, very difficult times in the negotiation of national and other wages. These were difficult times because we were chronically short. Not quite sure what is in the mic, so. But what can happen in those circumstances, especially when you are perhaps young, you can get very enthusiastic and drawn into the verbal battles. And I remember after one such occasion, early during my tenure, it was probably 1984, Polydor asked if I would be kind enough to allow him to come to see me at the Ministry of Finance. And I agreed. And he came and buttered me up with all the things I had been doing that had impressed his colleagues and how they spoke very favorably of me. But he went on to caution me about getting so enthused about the verbal interchange that I crossed the line, perhaps of politeness, in handling some of the colleagues and their suggestions. But the thing is, the way that Joseph Polidor could speak to you left an impression on you, because he was not nasty, he was not rough or rude. But when he left you thinking about what he'd said. And so I'm especially pleased to be able to join with you on a day like today, which we are told is his birthday, and use it as an occasion to remind ourselves of the great leaders that had preceded us, of the things they'd achieved, and what they expect of us today. I think that is very, very important if we are to maintain a balance, especially at times like these, which are very difficult. You've heard both the General Secretary and the President of the Union aver to some of the challenges facing the trade union movement and the TUC in particular. So one can I think, understand that these are big challenges, but we should understand also that we should try and do our best to ensure that we keep the lines of communication open and we find ways to communicate that will not frustrate the message, that will not damage the message that we have, which is a very important message on behalf of a very large, even if it isn't always as active and energetic as it should be, but a very large body that we represent. So that is what I'd like to say in relation to Joseph Polidor, who, as I say, I admired very much, and he was a great support and assistance in difficult times. Now, I gather from that our former Prime Minister and former multi-period mayor, Hammy Green, has a birthday tomorrow, and I want to thank Lincoln for drawing that to our attention, because somehow when these events occur, Hammy always forgets to call me and invite me over. So I don't have to wait for an invitation now. Former Prime Minister, you will see me, I won't come too early tomorrow, but I expect that the usual, what your colleagues used to call the comestibles, would be made available so that I can enjoy the day with you. Comrades, I wonder if you'd bear with me if I started off also on a very personal note. Many years ago, I registered to do a PhD at an institution in London. And that institution had made its name as a result of what they call attaining a standard as a center of excellence in part of the field of economics. The field doesn't really matter. Because the story I want to tell you has to do with labor and the importance of the movement and the importance of education in all its dimensions for the unions and the trade union movement. The place I was going to was a place called Birkbeck. It may not mean much to you. I know that there are going to be others here who know of it. It's today one of the colleges of the University of London, but it started off as an institution that was called the London Mechanics Institute. Moved from that in 1823 when it was established to the 1970s when it was recognized as a center of excellence, even within a university that had exceptional institutions that you would know, University College London, King's College, and the London School of Economics, which I'm sure you would have all heard. I don't want to talk so much about the university itself, but about the people that established this college. One of those persons, the main person, was a fellow by the name of Birkbeck, as you might imagine. It didn't start off with his name, but they appreciated his contribution to the education of the working men and the children of the working class. When he was a physician, but he was also a philanthropist. This is Mr. George Birkbeck, a medical doctor. When he launched the institute in 1823, there were 2,000 persons present trying to join, trying to register, trying to take advantage of that opportunity for working men and the sons, not the daughters, at least not yet, of working men to be educated in a variety of fields. The interesting thing about George Birkbeck's initiative was that the intention was to give working men instruction in what he called the branches of science and useful knowledge that would be relevant to their fields of work. And in the words of one commentator, the public as a whole didn't react very favorably to the idea that you must educate the children of the working class. And it was suggested that this was really a process of scattering the seeds of evil around the world. Now, we should be familiar with that attitude because in the 1820s, when the Congregational Church, which we call now the Congregational Church, was seen bent on educating slaves, and then the children of slaves, it faced similar resistance. But, you know, in time, this sort of resistance and ignorance will be overcome. It was overcome. By 1830, so the institution was established in 1823. By 1830, they had moved, and that's even before universal education was offered in Guyana, to enroll women. In 1830, Birkbeck enrolled women, and it became also the main provider of part-time education in the United Kingdom at the level of university, at the university level of university degrees, and it was also the largest of the night schools, as it were, where classes were offered at night, recognizing that working men were not likely to be in a position to attend full-time classes during the course of the day. Now you may wonder, well, okay, so this was a great place. What's that got to do with us? It doesn't have much to do with you for the moment. When I agreed, or when I sought to register at this institution, not as a working man, but this is over nearly a century and a couple of decades later, I was attracted to it because it had, at that time, the only black professor of economics in the United Kingdom. Certainly in London, definitely in the United Kingdom. There were a couple of others, but not in the field of economics. And that was an attraction. But Bertie Hines was to be my supervisor. He was a Jamaican by birth, and he had established the economics department at Birkbeck and had seen it grown from the time of its establishment to to being a center of excellence in the field in the United Kingdom. And as fate would have it, life is full of coincidences. I was doing postgraduate work before that in Kenya. And one of the people that rendered assistance to myself and an English colleague was a man by the name of Walter Elkin, who was a professor at Durham, professor of economics, and had been very kind to these two postgraduate students over the years. He made his name in the economics of Africa and had been kind enough to loan his vehicle to us whenever we were stuck, as often you could be in a place like Kenya, not because you didn't have a vehicle, but because the vehicle was challenged by the quality of the roads, particularly during the rainy season, when what might have been a road today turned into something else tomorrow. In the course of traveling around with Walter Elkin, he asked me where I came from. I explained to him that I was from Guyana, and he took that opportunity to ask whether I was aware of a Caribbean person teaching at Durham with him who had the name of Bertie Hines. I didn't know Hines, but I managed to see a review of Hines's work in The Economist when I was still an undergraduate. And the interesting about that is that the review happened just to have happened to be published alongside a review of a book called a book by Eric Williams called From Columbus to Castro, one of the most important pieces of work done on the Caribbean in the last century. To cut a long story short, although I didn't know Hines emerged soon after that as one of the debaters in a debate on television opposite a man by the name of Enoch Powell. Enoch Powell, who was an outstanding philosopher in his own right, appointed as a professor like Hines just after he was 30 years of age or even before. And that was a debate on racism in the United Kingdom in which Hines turned out to be, they were then to learn that he was an outstanding debater in addition to being a remarkable economist. And that attracted me to that institution. But the more general point I want to make is that we often underrate the importance of education and or the value of education to the entire community, and not just those who are going to be the leaders in the offices, in the parliament, and elsewhere. And this was Birkbeck's contribution. Its approach to education is one I value and I keep close to. And the coincidence that allowed me to come into contact with Walter Elkin, and in that way to be aware of the work of Bertie Hines, I value very much also. Now I want to say a couple of things about education before I move on to the specific topic I've been asked to address. And that topic, of course, is the topic of sustainable, or relates to sustainable development. It is that education, in the examination of education by economists, whether they're using the classical theories of economics, neoclassical theories, or label them what you may, education, I think, has always been recognized as being important. But more recently, or most recently, the importance of education has been appreciated, not only the education of an individual and the value that that individual brings to the community, by being equipped to help them to address problems, by helping the community to address problems, fixing things, analyzing things, and working with others. But it is also important because the economists have recognized and are sharing their understanding of systems, how systems work, and systems work better when the elements and actors in the system can relate to each other because their education, levels of education, types of education, approach to education allows them to communicate not only with the people in their discipline, not only with the people at their level, but with all the other categories in the community. And whilst we, as Guyanese, pride ourselves in what we have achieved in education over the years since 1860, in particular, I don't think we fully comprehend the contribution that education can make to our society and to our society getting out of the challenges that it currently faces. And that point I'm making not to say that I don't think you recognize its value to the community, but to say to you that it is as important to the trade union movement itself to promote the development of education across all spheres and dimensions of the trade union movement, just as it is to the community as a whole. And this is something in the discipline of economics that is only now being fully appreciated. It is not only the number of people that need to be educated, but the quality of their education and the ultimate goal of that education in facilitating communication and understanding among people in the same office or outside of the office. The question that I've been asked to address is one that is not entirely new in the sense that the Millennium Development Goals were a target set in 2000 by 189 countries who were members of the UN with a view to tackling some of the problems, or tackling the main problems that the world acknowledged needed to be addressed if we are all to move forward and to move forward together. And the Millennium Development Goal Initiative, you might ask, which is the predecessor, that is the MDGs, which are the predecessors to the Sustainable Development Goals that we're looking at currently, has been replaced by the Millennium Development, the Sustainable Development Goals. People often ask, but why has that happened? And I think it's useful to recognize that whilst that initiative wasn't perfect, it did help to overcome some of the very concerns that gave rise to it. The issue of getting people out of poverty, the issue of making inroads against hunger, the attempt to ensure that most girls and young women are able to attend school, the need to protect the planet, and so forth. It has been estimated that some or only 3.5 of the targets set for the Millennium Development Goals have been achieved. And the reason is that perhaps the analysis of these problems was not satisfactory, was not complete. It may have also been because the causes of global poverty, such as the growing regional wealth disparities, wealth disparities within the regions, employment issues, inadequate infrastructure, and so forth were not tackled assiduously enough. But when you look at what happened between 2000 and 2015, when SDGs were embraced, you will see that a significant proportion of humanity did do well out of it. And if I'm to tell you that the success cases include both China, the world's largest country by way of population, relatively recently, and Brazil, one of the largest in terms of size, you will understand that the achievement was not insignificant. We say it's only 3.5 out of 17, but it was not insignificant. So, in the light of the fact that we didn't achieve those goals within the period that was set for them, we've now set some goals to be achieved. 193 countries, additional to the last batch, to be achieved by 2030. And in September 2015, it was decided that those new goals under the rubric of Sustainable Development Goals should be tackled by the world as a whole in circumstances where a greater part of the onus for implementation is to be placed on the countries themselves. Greater part of the onus to be placed on the countries themselves, and the SDGs cover issues that are highly relevant to the work of trade unions. These include the provision or promotion of decent work, fight against poverty again, inequalities, climate change, and the need for greater gender equality, free quality education, public services, and stronger institutions. These are amongst the new focuses that go with the Sustainable Development Goals. And it's perhaps useful also to say that the number of targets that have been set under this new initiative have moved from 18 to 169. The number of indicators have moved from 48 to something like 2031. And the geographical coverage now is not only coverage of developing countries, but of the entire world, rich and poor, because it's been recognized that the existence of disparities, especially widening disparities, contribute in no small way to global instability. And so one of the targets, of course, is to pursue the goals, but the focus is to ensure that there is a narrowing of these disparities and that poverty reduction remains a major focus. Sustainability is also now identified as a very important priority. And what is more, the SDGs, if you allow me to use that shorthand, in the individual states that are fashioning targets and means are to be undertaken by groups of persons. The idea of inclusivity has now become central to this initiative. And you will see a lot of emphasis being paid to this, and I make special mention of it in the light of the comments that were made, again, by the General Secretary and the President, meaning that it has been recognized that one of the weaknesses, one of the reasons why we were not able to achieve the target set for the Millennium Development Goals had to do with our failure to be as inclusive as we could have been. And so, in pursuing the new initiative, there ought to be no place for exclusion, whether it is of trade unions or of groups in the community. Stakeholders of all types need to be involved. Categories and subcategories that are representative of important elements amongst our stakeholders must also find a place. This is what lies behind the move from NDGs to SDGs. So exclusiveness or exclusion has no place under this new initiative because it has been recognized that failure to be inclusive is almost guaranteed to ensure failure to achieve the goals and targets that have been set. I hope that is clear. And I hope that in selling your demands to be included, you bear that in mind and make that evident to those with whom you interface. It is not only a right, it has been recognized as a necessary tool if we are to go forward. The SDGs and the pursuit of SDGs, which Guyana, like 192 other countries, has embraced, has to deal fully with the trade unions because the work of the trade unions is central to the achievement and implementation of these SDGs. The unions can play a crucial role. Let me identify 5 reasons. These are important actors. Trade unions and labor representatives are important actors in advocacy and in representation. In other words, taking up interests, problems, and goals of people in the wider community. And of course, the unions have a special target group, that is workers and their family. And so they have a mandate to undertake advocacy and representation. So they're not asking for seats at the table just in order to be there. They have a function. They are representative. They may not be representative of political groups as such. Their mandate cuts across political groups, and therefore this idea of exclusion or excluding poses a problem. Freedom of association. The exercise of union rights is part of our rights of freedom of association in the modern societies, a right enshrined not only in our Constitution, but in the UN Charter. Freedom of association. The Commonwealth Charter also, which charter is of relatively recent vintage, but it is a charter that in assessing the performance of different governments, assessing the performance of governments when they come to defend their performance before the heads of state and governments of the Commonwealth. That is one of the litmus tests, whether there is or whether freedom of association is respected. And I tell you that because when the Maldives, for example, a place that you may know for other reasons, a place of lovely blue waters and white sand, was going through a very peculiar phase in the middle of the last decade. This was one of the tests that the Commonwealth itself asked, and this was one of the things they asked of the leadership, whether they had permitted, whether they had been paying attention to the need to ensure freedom of association. Collective bargaining, I don't need to outlined the virtues of collective bargaining to you and its importance to trade unions. It's important to us as former slaves, as former indentured servants, as former members of a community of less than free labor, let me put it that way. When you would have gone through an experience like that, then of course you will be especially appreciative of your right to be represented by those that you have chosen, not those that don't like whoever's speaking for you. So that is one of the challenges of governments, and governments have to live with that. It is a right. Collective bargaining and this contention over collective bargaining, I myself would like to see that end as soon as possible, because these are rights our people have died for. These are rights Polydor and Critchlow and all of his associates would have struggled for throughout their lives. Monitoring and analysis, when the targets set in budgets or elsewhere, but now in the context of the SDGs, when those targets are set, some set of bodies has to report on them. And in fact, out of the office of the president in Guyana, a minister reports to the UN on a voluntary basis and then on a basis where the reporting is compulsory. And in reporting, they have to be in a position to speak authoritatively on what is happening. You cannot do that alone at the level of the central government. Part of the intent, part of the value of monitoring is that monitoring is done by a wide range of entities and observers who have the opportunity to see the initiative at work at first hand. They represent a constituency, but they also have a mandate to get from that constituency the constituency's needs and disappointments. You cannot properly monitor if you choose to exclude from the process of dialogue and monitoring such an important element of the community, such an important actor in the community, a voice of such a fundamental set of actors within our community. So these are four of the crucial things that trades unions or the labor movement as a whole can play in the context of setting SDG targets, which of course are passed. As an old economist, I find it difficult sometimes to put aside the language of the economists. SDRs, of course, are a different matter. But I'm speaking here of the SDGs. And the last of the activities that the unions can be useful in have to do with gender balance and the question of the involvement of youths. This is an issue that is increasingly urgent in the context of Guyana, where such a high proportion of our population below the age of 35, and more importantly, I like to use a lower age target, below the age of 25, constitute the youths in this country. And therefore, the unions, in representing workers, have a role to play in ensuring, pushing both for gender balance and for youth involvement. And of course, unions in this country are committed to those things. So these are five of the areas in which unions can and are usually involved in across the globe in pursuit of the SDGs. Many unions and many elements of the labor movement have conducted monitoring analysis of how their governments are doing with regards to their commitments to achieving the implementation of their SDGs. And you can find on the internet and elsewhere the results of that monitoring. Some of it, of course, is quite positive, but one of the things that is very clear is that there are many challenges. There are many challenges in achieving these goals. And if you think about it, it is almost obvious that that is what would happen because SDGs are a more complicated endeavor than were the Millennium Development Goals. In the Caribbean started relatively close to the Millennium Development Goals, and by the year 2015, when we were reporting on it, they were able to say that they had achieved many, or they moved towards the achievement of many of the targets. This was a positive outcome. But you know, to the extent that those targets were relatively simple, they were relatively simple, it would have been a lot easier to move to their achievement than it will be for issues that are as interrelated and as complicated as those that constitute sustainable development goals. And when I think it would have been 2018 or 2019, the statisticians of the region, together with those from the UN, were brought together in Jamaica to look at how the region would measure these different indicators that have been set up. Then alarm bells started to ring because the measurement of these indicators is not a straightforward matter. And in a region and in a country in particular, where the quality of statistical data has declined, we were in the forefront of socioeconomic data analysis in the 1950s and early 1960s, and perhaps even until the early 1970s. But that is no longer the case. One of the things that struck me when I was looking at some tributes to previous distinguished persons of Guyana, I was struck by the number of those persons who, in the course of their professional work, or the course of their education, had actually formally done statistics and therefore understood and worked with statistics. It is quite astonishing, whether they are in the arena of agriculture, whether they, like Frank Hope, ended up in finance but started off with a degree in statistics and then moved to economics. That was that time. Today, it is difficult to find a formally trained statistician or persons who are interested in that area. But what we are looking at is an attempt to measure the necessity of measuring quantitatively values of targets that actually are largely qualitative, such as education. As I say, the issue is not the number of people that you pass through the school, but what it is you teach them, the context in which you teach them, how you teach them. I like to tell the story when I was attending Forbes Burnham's funeral. Willie Dimas, one of the greatest economists this region has produced, and certainly one of the most widely respected in the region and elsewhere, Willie Dimas traveled with me to the ceremony. And out of the blue, which was a common issue with Dimas, suddenly said, you know, the fellows at UE have this puzzle about Guyanese and Guyanese students. That so many of them in the sciences, medicine, they arrive with good results, A-level results. They start off in the science labs knowing very few of the pieces of apparatus that are in the lab. Many of them hadn't seen many of those pieces of apparatus. You can imagine how much worse it is for physics. But anyway, let me stick to the general science, which is which is where many, well, not, I shouldn't say many of us, let me speak for myself, the area of exposure that they were limited to. And he said many of those students have to struggle both to learn new things that they're learning on the academic side and at the desks, and also to learn equipment that others have been working with for at least 5 years in secondary school. And so when I speak to education and its quality, I'm saying we have a habit of one, focusing on bookishness, but also a habit of forgetting that there are many dimensions to one's education. Many dimensions to one's education. And the practical exposure, the exposure on the practical side, is just as important as the theoretical or the desk exposure. So this is a dimension that we have to bear in mind, that in trying to measure performance, there are going to be challenges to our technical skills and to our ability. The reviews that have been done across the world of the SDGs have tried to take into account those issues that are a priority to trades union, and that it is to those that I paid particular attention, given your own interest. The SDGs, as I said, you have 17, but they're complex. It's not a single SDG that says income. In the old days when one started studying economics, that was a relatively simple exercise. You go measure gross domestic product, what is the output of a country, and you got a single figure. And you can rank countries ordinarily by having those figures. However, when you tell people that the target is poverty reduction, it's a different ballgame. How do you measure poverty? Is income relevant? Of course income is relevant. Is it all that's relevant? Of course not. There are many other things that reflect wealth or poverty in a community. And it's all those other things that you're trying to measure, and to get one figure or to get one sentence or a statement that will mean something to people all across the world. So SDG 1 is of interest, clearly. It has to be of interest to the labor movement because it has to do with the ending of poverty. But you are going to be challenged to help in the measurement of the achievement of the goals, like the government will be. So it's not the government's problem. It is also yours. You therefore have to equip yourselves by using the skills that you have from your membership and from elsewhere to help monitor what is going on. We are in a country where people like to think, well, that is the government's business. They have to report to the UN, it is their business. If they go and report untruthfully or foolishly, you are going to be penalized. That is why you have a responsibility to equip yourself to be party to the monitoring. Am I making sense to you? So that is one side. Poverty is of interest. It is, however, not straightforward. The other one on gender and equality is similarly problematic. And I'm not going to go through the elements there because as former suppliers of unfree labor, you will know that often it is the victims themselves who are reactionary or don't see well enough what needs to be done on their own behalf. It is as true of women as it was true of slaves or sometimes of children. So it is also important that not only that the union movement ensure that the women it represents understand the goals, but that they also help to participate in the measurement of the achievement of those goals and the instruments, the means that are used to achieve the goals. Because sometimes you set instruments and you will be amazed to know that they don't work in many circumstances. Maybe they were fashioned with a particular context in mind. But in reality, the context is more complicated and the instrument can be irrelevant. So that is one side. There's also the issue of decent work, similarly complicated. Um, that is SDG 8. There is SDG 10, perhaps a little less complicated, but arithmetically equally difficult to measure, and that has to do with reduced inequalities. Is it only the inequalities in terms of wages you're talking about? Is it only inequalities of pensions? No. It is inequality that leads to uneven asset endowments, whether it is houses, when it is means of generating income. There are a whole set of factors here to be taken into account. And therefore, measurement is similarly complicated. Reduced inequalities, of course, unions, labor movement must have an interest in that. Climate action, which is a more recent obsession. Initially, we thought this was something driven primarily by the West, okay? But the question of climate action, climate change, we in countries like Guyana can see the impact of. I was just speaking to someone telling me about their operations in the hinterland near to Amalia Falls, where the water until this week had stopped flowing. Okay? That is not the result of anything that Guyana has done. That is the result of global activities, global behavior. Most of that behavior impacting adversely on climate change originates where? Outside of the South, outside of the countries of the South. But we carry the brunt of the consequences because we are not developed states in the sense of having the capacity to control our physical environment. Part of the definition of this issue of poverty, it doesn't only have to do with income and wealth. It has to do with whether you are in a position to control your physical and social environment so that you're not a victim of that environment when it changes. When the sun doesn't shine, are your people going to starve? You know, when water stops flowing in the US or it stops flowing, even in Russia, they have technological capacity to deliver it from one place to the next. They have the technological capacity to mediate the impact of poor nutrition on old people or young people or what have you. All of that is part of a reflection of wealth. It's a reflection of what we're trying to measure. These are not only physical things that you easily associate with what you know. And so this is why I have gone to the trouble of seeing what the unions, labor movement is saying about these SDGs, and the SDGs that are of special interest to the unions, to the labor movement. They're not, of course, we are, as human beings, would have an interest in all of them, and we live in a society. What happens next door is going to affect us. But insofar as you have a mandate as unions which mobilize, activate, and inspire the workforce, then you should have a greater interest in these goals that I have highlighted for you. And the union movement, through its representatives at the international level, have participated or recently participated. The UNGA that you would have witnessed when the president of Guyana spoke and the president of the Bolivarian Republic also had things to say, it had other business. The business was not mainly about the speeches that you heard. Maybe the more important business was taking place elsewhere. And one of those sets of activities had to do with these SDGs and the reporting by the agencies that are monitoring SDGs, including the ITUC and some of the other representatives of the labor movement, the TUDCN, that is the network for trade unions, the development network for trade unions. They were having meetings, and at those meetings, they were reporting on their experiences, the implementation, the problems they were encouraging with implementation. And there is a document called A Trade Union Take. This is a new language that has become common, the trade union take on the SDGs. They've compiled a set of perspectives, and you will see that in the June edition, 2023, they're reporting on the experiences, I think in total of about 12 countries. It's very interesting because it includes countries of the Caribbean. It doesn't include Guyana. It includes Venezuela. It includes Colombia. And you will see, as a union movement, that it's useful perhaps to have a look at what they're reporting. In reality, they are the governments and the union movement has been facing structural, social, and economic challenges, issues that have to do with security. And in the course of that examination, I note that they called, and this is in September, they were calling for a new social compact, okay, which compact would have the SDG 8 at its core. And this is one to do with labor and employment, SDG 8. And they called for responses to workers' demands for decent, climate-friendly jobs, and for a just transition, meaning that in the process of moving and adjusting to problems such as COVID, shortage of revenue for the treasury, you must bear in mind what? Justice, fairness, what they call a just transition. So you're moving from where you are now, which is clearly very problematic, to, if it's economists, they will tell you some equilibrium. But it mustn't be something, an equilibrium that does not take into account human needs, and those that are listed here in the SDGs. So there are being calls for a minimum living wage, equal pay for women, and a whole set of other things. And they've also tried to set out where countries have moved, and they've moved reasonably successfully. Amongst those, they have talked not only about what governments have done, but how governments have collaborated with others in achieving those goals. And what I would say is that it would seem that although SDGs are integrated into the problems of the arrangements of most governments, it remains the case that the aims of the labor movement, the wishes of the labor movement, are not anywhere close to being achieved in spite of that. Amongst the governments that reported, and now not reflected in the book with the summary, was of course Guyana. The minister in the Ministry of Finance, Dr. Singh, made a presentation during the high-level political forum, and he presented something called One Guyana, Achieving Low-Carbon Sustainable Development for All, and explained that the country's national strategy is deliberately closely aligned with that of Agenda 2030, meaning the goals set by the SDGs, SDG initiative. And he highlighted that we've made significant progress in attaining the Sustainable Development Goals. Government has worked aggressively on a range of things. I don't want to catalog these for you. I'm sure the minister and his colleagues will do that. But I just wanted to say to you that governments have been reporting. Sub-agencies, such as the trade unions, have been reporting. What you have to do as trade union members and as a grouping as important as the TUC is what? To make sure that when the reporting is done, your inputs are in there. Your inputs are in there, because if your inputs are not in there, you cannot get feedback that will call for changes or improvements. I hope that's making sense to you. So that is what occurred in September, and I want to say, I know that I need now to try and wrap up, that there have been many challenges faced by the countries that have reported, and the unions have reported on some of those. Guyana has some peculiarities arising from its geography, population distribution, problems of fractiousness at the political and other levels and so forth, and the fact that educational reform, for example, is not what it should be, and dispersal of the populace and availability of funds affects that. I want to say something about what has been happening in Guyana recently, which should trigger some movement by the, pardon the repetition, by the TUC and its associated agencies in terms of fashioning its strategy. I'm saying that in the 2 or 3 decades since the MDGs had been launched, there have been very many significant economic, political, and even physical changes taking place in Guyana. If you walk the streets, you will see that. They're not all about fancy new houses. They're not all about fancy new houses. And I like to tell people, when I was a child, maybe I shouldn't go that far back. Maybe I should say that in the 90s, a street like Norton Street, to which I came as a child, or Princess Street, where I spent many happy hours as a child and even as an adult, although I don't want to speak about that. I fear that your General Secretary is about to embark on that when he made mention of his knowledge of a former minister who left us a few minutes ago. Those parts of Georgetown have been transformed. Maybe you live here, you don't notice. As you go east along those streets, they have been converted from an area of middle, and lower middle income groups of Guyana to virtual slums. I myself would be very reluctant after dark to walk at the eastern end of Norton Street, let alone of Princess Street. And one of our gold miners, whose wife was a former minister, stopped on Princess Street to take a phone call a couple of years ago, and set off when he finished the phone call with a broken arm and broken ribs. The country has changed physically, socially, as well as income-wise. And we have to bear that in mind as trade union members. And I'm saying that the fallout from COVID has had many consequences. We've known and talked about those in terms of employment, changing patterns of employment, loss of jobs by certain people, and certain skills, and the ability of governments to meet basic needs requirements. But what seems to have been forgotten sometimes is that we need to focus on human-centered recovery. It's not only financial recovery, but human-centered recovery and resilience. And need to pay attention to a whole set of measures. In Guyana, there have been marked changes in the level of inflation, which has, of course, implications for certain categories. If you are on fixed incomes, if you are public servants, if you are not vendors in the street, then you're likely to be on fixed incomes, and in the face of inflation, fixed incomes mean lower real incomes, lower purchasing power, a lower capacity to buy and to pay for the necessities of life. So when a government deals with its populace and its incomes policies, as the economists would call it, don't do anything about prices, it doesn't do anything about interest payments, interest charges, but you try to restrict incomes, salaries, or wages of certain groups. It has implications for their position, the hierarchy. It has implications for income inequality and disparities. And therefore, I'm saying it has implications for your capacity to recruit and retain skills and the non-skilled, because Guyana finds itself, notwithstanding what is being said, with a very high level of out-migration, emigration, notwithstanding the rates of growth, 40%, 50-odd% rates of growth of GDP. People are leaving. That is so. And it means that you have to bear in mind or look at the causes of that phenomenon. You have other things going on, bribery and corruption, new activities on the street, very many low-income activities involving the sale of low-value products, the physical occupation of space by individuals who may happen to own a house next to a road, or own a business next to a road, or have a business near a pedestrian pavement. And they are appropriating these things as though it's their own. When a space is named a public space, it doesn't mean it belongs to private individuals, whoever can take it up. It means that it should enjoy free access to the public. All members of the public are entitled to use it without exclusion. Instead of that, we see increasingly people pay taxes, you rebuild Sherry Street, and you wake up a morning and find that the entire pedestrian walkway of Sherry Street, from the public road to Mandela, are taken over by the owners of cars or buses. No, I didn't say ambulances, and other things. But that is an appropriation. That's an appropriation of public property to which people have no right. It reflects in part the failure. And let me say, this is what I'm telling you isn't something that I woke up a morning and saw. I do wake up each morning and see it. But the Attorney General himself has made reference to it. But we are a country where we seem not to realize that governments have responsibilities. When you see things that are wrong, you have a right to remedy them. Pass legislation to fix and to ensure that the regulatory and police authorities enforce. And, well, this isn't a peculiarity of this government, but we seem in recent times to be afraid to exercise our rights as citizens, as persons and officials who are operating on behalf of government to protect the interests of everybody. Instead, we leave it to look after. We seem to not realize that we are enhancing the interests of a few. So you have a large number of informal activities taking place, as I say, on pavements, meaning less NIS collection, meaning less regulation, meaning that when you go into quarantine, Port Morant, on a Friday, you will know that thousands of vendors are on the road there, including those from Georgetown. And you ask yourself why? They go there because they know that the regulatory authorities will not be going there on Friday or the weekend. So they can sell you whether it's medication or food that is really illegal for them to sell to you. You have, with the growth of these informal activities, a deepening and widening of illegal activities. And as illegal activities become more common, people treat it as their right. It happened in respect of Merriman's Mall. Two people go on Merriman's Mall, and the next day you hear all the newspapers and all those who can write letters saying, but they are poor people, what you expect them to do? They have to eat. But their eating was never intended to be via processes that cause pollution of the drains, dozens of people living and using facilities that are non-existent, that endanger the health of the general public. We are in a mode of existence where people believe that they're entitled to things that they're not entitled to. Your rights stop where they affect mine. Your rights stop where they affect mine. So all the illegality and so forth that is becoming common affect the quality of our lives. And for that reason, you perhaps can understand why it is that some people get so aggravated when they come to speak about the public service. The failure to pay attention to the public service. To the extent that you don't do that, you will find that these things become more common and they become more brazen. There are many such things have occurred, but I just wanted to draw to your attention some of these. The arrival and establishment of businesses by foreigners. And I'm not really thinking about Venezuelans, but even by investors on our behalf. So you have the oil and petroleum companies operating in Guyana. And some of the contractors are retaining and employing Guyanese, first by giving them less favorable contracts than foreigners, including Caribbean persons, giving them pay that is less favorable or less generous than others, including Caribbean persons, and trying to forbid them from communicating differences in emoluments to others. In other words, people have complained that they've been threatened with termination if they show somebody else their contract or report to somebody else that they're being paid less than they should be paid. These are abuses, and we have arrived at a situation where those abuses have gone too far. The abuses have gone to the point where I believe, and again, I'm not expert in these matters, but the question of health and safety, just to take one, that traditionally in Guyana was an area that we were quite strong on. Had a Ministry of Labor, Health, and so forth, paying close attention to these things. And today, apart from the mining collapses, which is now old hat, so that when two men die, nobody worries, or children die, nobody worries. You have men that are trying to demonstrate their manhood by trying to build higher and higher skyscrapers. But they're building the skyscrapers without making provision for the safety of the workers. That is what is happening. People have fallen off of those places. Some have died. And this is not, in the 19th century, in the late 19th century, it was those sorts of abuses which had led to the establishment of trade unions in Europe and in Britain in particular, and which inspired Critchlow to set up the first trade union in the British Empire. And here we are 100 and a few decades later, and we are back We are back there where people are endangering the rights of workers with impunity. And on top of that, threatening them and bullying them not to report breaches of the law. This is wrong. And I'm telling you all of this. I'm telling you all of this. So that when we hear all about skill shortages, 100,000 people need to be imported to carry out our jobs, we will see them in context. We will see them in a context that talks about or recognizes that it is our duty as citizens, as union members, as the government, to ensure adequate training, whether it is on-the-job training or it's not on-the-job training, adequate training for those who could properly carry out the tasks that we need carried out. We mustn't wake up a morning and hear a minister say, oh yeah, we had handed out a whole set of work permits to foreigners to do what? To drive trucks. Can you believe that? To drive trucks. Now, I'm not saying driving isn't a skill, because I had spent a good deal of my less mature days contending that I was a great driver and that driving is something that you need to learn. But you are in a country where probably 8 to 9% of the people on the road with motor vehicles, never mind the new electric bikes, motor vehicles that are lethal weapons, 4 wheels, a petrol engine, and the capacity to kill several people in one swoop. We have people that are good at that. They acquire a driving license without ever taking a driving test. And yet we go and recruit foreigners to come and do the same thing. There isn't a shortage of such people. There are a large number of people in Guyana willing to drive trucks and run over other people. And although you may think, well, this is a Georgetown phenomenon, a significant proportion, if not a majority of those road deaths take place in the rural countryside, on the roads outside of Georgetown, where it is West Bank, West Dem, Quarantine, West Coast, Police. Well, East Bank is another story. That is a car park, so I'm surprised that people get killed there, because very little moves on it. But the point I'm trying to make to you is that we are faced by these challenges. Often we perhaps see them in isolation rather than seeing them as being related one to the other. And to the unions, to the Trade Union Congress, and other entities I'm seeing, you have to bear those things in mind, especially those specific to Guyana, but also bear in mind what is happening elsewhere and what they're calling for. I know that you pay attention to those, but I'm saying as regards these things that we get up in the morning and complain about, in addition to electricity, you have to find a plan B. It is not true that you can only, somebody tells me, well, if plan A doesn't work, choose plan A minus or plan A modified. And we tend to do that rather than to go to a plan B. What I'm saying is that many of the things I mentioned in the last 5 or 10 minutes have to do with the rights that early legislation set out to protect and to enforce. I'm saying, I'm not asking you to forget these things other than emoluments and wages and salaries, but look at these other elements. In looking at these other elements, you can demand attention be paid to them. And I'm wondering, and I'm not an expert in these, a long time since I left Birkbeck and paid attention to labor economics. It was never labor laws, but the economics of labor. And now that I'm reflecting on them, I'm asking myself whether the challenges faced by, whether it is our fishermen or workers on the building site or workers that have been displaced, in the shops on Regent Street. Now you have Indians and Africans working in those shops now. They're being displaced by Venezuelans. And I'm not making that point to complain about Venezuelans, but to say to you that this is a device for the owners to pay them even less than they had been paying the Indians and the Africans in those shops before. And so we have to look at all of that. And I ask then, is it time for us to go back to basics? Do we need to revisit this question of, I think it used to be called the Labor Code Commission. Is anybody old enough to know about Whitney? Was it Whitney Councils? When people selling in, I wouldn't acknowledge that hand because I don't want old to be associated with you. When it was recognized that certain trades, certain jobs needed protection by the regulatory authorities because the individuals that worked in them could not get together to bargain collectively on their own behalf. They set up a special body called the Whitney Council. That was here up to the time when I was at UG, intended for the government to intervene to protect the interests of those workers. Petrol stations, hotels of all types, restaurants, bars. These were the places at that time that commanded such attention. I'm saying to you that life has changed. The problems of Guyana in some ways have become more acute, but the locations and disciplines that carry those threats to the vulnerable have changed. Have we revisited the regulations and legislation? Is it time for us to revisit the labor codes? Is it time for us to revise them, to make them more relevant, and perhaps more importantly, to ensure that the sanctions are meaningful? Because when you hear somebody has refused to pay NIS, they've taken the NIS deductions from employees, they don't pay it over, you know it is well nigh impossible for the individual to go to NIS and persuade them of anything. Persuade them of anything, at least when it comes to them paying out money. Is it appropriate for me to invite the labor movement to revisit this exercise, to work with others within Guyana? And sometimes, we know that employers are not always going to be on the same level as you are. But sometimes you recognize that in pursuit of these goals, you don't have permanent allies. So you get together with employers for certain things or certain categories, and you get together with others for certain categories of claims and move forward in that way. And also to make better use of the skills we have. This is a place where every day I learn I don't know very much about Guyana. I turn up to New Amsterdam, where I was born, only to find your General Secretary poised there amongst well-established New Amsterdammers, claiming to be a relative of these Berbetians. And the point I want to make here is that amongst those Berbetians and amongst others known to Mr. Lewis are outstanding trade unionists from Guyana. When we were in Barbados, I don't want to talk about that. We happened to be there together by coincidence at one point in our lives. He may want to talk about his experiences there, but I want to say to you that we were there. There were other Guyanese there, including George de Pina, who was an outstanding trade unionist of Guyana, outstanding trade unionist of the region, outstanding international trade unionist. I went to a funeral where one of the people that Lincoln claims to be a relative is undoubtedly was undoubtedly an outstanding trade unionist. The question is, do we make use of those people, their experience, their talents, their links, the connections they have internationally? Some of what I want you to take would require assistance from the ILO, for example. Yes, you, as members, would know people in the ILO, but some of those who would have worked with Barbados or elsewhere in the world can get together with you to approach these agencies to bring challenges or problems to their attention. This problem you face, some of which you articulate, is a bit like diplomacy. What I was saying about dealing with Venezuela, it is not about having a minister go and talk to another minister this year and then going back and talking to a different minister in 5 years' time. It has to be a constant process. And that process requires both the leaders and the followers in institutions like the trade union to be doing this constant dialogue, be in their ear all the time, be in their so they can't forget that you have a problem, that you need some money, that you need some technical assistance, that you need some resources. That is what has to happen. Of course, this is a line in politics. Many people get fed up with politicians, believe that politicians talk too much. Well, they do, but that is because people, by and large, are deaf. They don't pay attention when you ask them for things. And so you have to keep asking. And this is what applies here. The unions have to get together. One, well, that side I'm not going to get involved in. You must know that has to be a remedy. But the point is, you have to reach out. You have to help to get others to help you to reach out. And when you are not in situ, they will continue to echo the pleas and the calls that you've been making. I hope I'm making sense to you. There is no silver bullet to any of our problems, whether they are political problems, whether they are problems with Venezuela. They require hard work. They require legwork. They require repetition. They require going back and throwing yourself at the ramparts as they used to do in the old days. Sometimes climbing on each other's backs, climbing in each other's hands. You have to recognize that this is sweat and tears. And yeah, it's not, when Critchlow used to go, and this is the last point I'm going to make, because I hear this man vilified and misrepresented quite wrongly by ignoramuses in this community, arguing or contending that Critchlow never tried to mobilize and unionize all the segments of this community. He didn't do anything for the sugar workers. It's untrue. And those of you that are old enough, I'm not old enough, but there was a time when if you attempted to enter Linden as a trade union activist, you could find yourself in the lockups or worse. That happened in the time of Critchlow. It happened in the time of Critchlow. So, yes, you may have problems as trade union members, as trade union leaders, but that isn't the worst that could happen to you. Worse has happened to your predecessors, and they were able to overcome. So I invite you to do the same and to mobilize all of us. I'm not saying it's your work alone. We all have a responsibility to work with you and to assist you. And so it has been my pleasure to deliver this piece to you. And I do wish that in the remaining sessions that you have, your speaker wouldn't be perhaps quite so long-winded, and that you will find the comments and presentations useful and entertaining, and that you can build on those as we go forward in the years ahead. Because the battle is not going to finish at the end of October or at the end of November. So thanks very much. Gird your loins and move forward.
Why? I think we can give Mr. Greenwich a better round of applause for that. His address has put us, or would have put us in perspective. He would have given us a reminder of the sustainable development goals and what it is that we need to do as unionists, as a trade union, and how we should go forward in confronting all the challenges and issues we would have faced. Thank you very much, sir. A very short man with a very tall perspective. Ladies and gentlemen, I know that you have been sitting a while, but you are given food for thought. You are giving information that is relevant and timely. And so at this point in time, we are going to sit and listen again to the song, Not a Blade of Grass.
We are a peaceful people, struggling we struggle, and we don't look for trouble, just ask around. But when outside faces, from foreign places, talk about taking over, we ain't backing down. No, we ain't giving up no mountain, and we ain't giving up no tree, we ain't giving up no river, that belong to we. Not one blue sake, not one rice grain, not one for us, not a blade of grass. This land is our land now, we're gonna make it somehow. We will bend like a bow, but never break. Our fathers came here, and they lived and died here, and we are moving from here, make no mistake. No, we ain't giving up no mountain, and we ain't giving up no tree, we ain't giving up no river, that belong to we. Not one blue sake, not one rice grain, not one for us, not a blade of grass. We love the open country of the Rupanuni and the Essex River, daytime or night. Though we criticize it, this is our home, we love it, and we mean to keep it. We have that right. No, we ain't giving up no mountain, no, we ain't giving up no tree, we ain't giving up no river, that belong to we. Not one blue sake, not one rice grain, not one for us, not a blade of grass, not one golden apple, not one jamon, not a drop of water from the farmer room, not one sherriga, not one mommy, not one guinea.
Thank you very much, DJ. At this point in time, I'd like to invite Brother Ian Andrews, who will take us through the vote of thanks. Let's put our hands together and welcome him as he comes.
Thank you, Comrade Chairman. Comrades, please allow me to stand on the protocols already established by those before me. My task today is a simple one, which is to express thanks to every person that attended this opening ceremony. However, it would be remiss of me not to make a few specific acknowledgements. Firstly, I'd like to say thank you to Comrade Hamilton Green, former Prime Minister, former Mayor, who also has a long list of accolades that qualifies him at this time to be an elder statesman. And the youngster will be having his birthday tomorrow, so I will give him happy birthday, Comrade Green. Thanks to Comrade Henry Jeffrey, former Minister of Education. Thanks to Comrade Carl Greenwich, give the feature address. I guess we would have learned a lot from him, former Finance and Foreign Affairs Minister. Thank you, sir. Dr. Simpson de Silva, this is a minister that we hardly ever remember that he was. And one of the youngest ministers, I think, in the history of this country. He was Minister of Agriculture. And it would have indicated to me at the time, the leader that was there, and a lot of interest in youth and youth development. Because at that time, there was also a vibrant YSM. I'm not saying there isn't one now, but it was vibrant. I also like to say thank you to Comrade Roysdale Ford, Senior Council Member of Parliament, and Shadow Attorney General. Thank you, sir. Also like to say thank you to Comrade Vincent Alexander, the Chairman of the Burnham Foundation. It's a foundation that is very close to my heart. Also like to say thank you to Comrade Dennis Miller, the Deputy Mayor of the City of Georgetown. Thank you, Comrade Miller. And I also like to say thanks to Comrade Ubraj Narain, former Mayor of Georgetown. Just bear with me a little here. I also like to say thank you to Comrade Daniel Siram, the Regional 4 Chairman, who is, like me, a trooper. Thank you, Daniel. I also like to say there are some persons who are very important. You know, there are some persons who we love to hate. I say that to say whenever the media, the all-important media, say nice things about us, we feel good. And when we perceive that they may be saying bad things about us, we get annoyed sometimes, but they have their work to do. But there are some very invisible workers. These persons, you know, you hardly ever know they're around. But they made all of this that we are enjoying here today possible. And over the couple of days to come, they'll be there working. So you invisible workers, you know yourself, and I say thank you very much. Finally, comrades, if I fail to mention anyone, it's not that I find you less important. And I say to you, thank you for spending time with us. And I hope that you enjoy a pleasant rest of the evening. Thank you very much.
Comrades, when we depart this evening, we shall be resuming at 9 in the morning. Even if I am putting 9:30, I'm putting 9 because I observe when I give you 10, you come 11. So I'm helping you to help yourself. But the General Secretary report will be on this, will be made at 9:30 in the morning. So we need to be before we start. The same thing will happen on Tuesday, on Friday, and after Friday night, we'll have a cocktail reception in honor of in recognition of the 5th Triennial Delegates Conference. All are invited. All delegates and observer will pick up their invitation in the morning. So we expect all of you to be here. and we will work hard. This will be a conference with a difference. We are choosing in this conference technical people to enrich the discussion, like what started here tonight. Carl, you have done it again. I don't believe you're standing on anyone's shoulder or you form on the ground. Thank you. Mr. Chairman?
Thank you very much, Brother Andrews and Brother Lewis, for giving the vote of thanks and those remarks respectively. Ladies and gentlemen, we are almost to the end of our program. I'd like to invite you to stand as we sing the international, after which we'll have the closure. The words of the international, they're printed on your program, and it's on the inside of your program. Solidarity forever.